Hello, and welcome to Talking Brains. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Sarkis. Today I'll be talking with Dr. Jeremy Gaies about collaborative divorce. Please hit that subscribe button and give us a rating. It's appreciated. Enjoy the podcast. Today I'm speaking with Jeremy Gaies, PsyD. He's a licensed psychologist and certified family mediator who specializes in helping divorced families pursue peaceful solutions. Dr. Gaies has played a leadership role in advancing the collaborative movement at the local, state, and national level. He's a member of the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the Florida Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the Tampa Bay Academy of Collaborative Professionals, and Next Generation Divorce. Dr. Gaies is the author of A Clear and Easy Guide to Collaborative Divorce and the co-author of Mindful Co-Parenting, A Child-Friendly Path Through Divorce. In addition to his work with Tampa Bay Collaborative Trainers, Dr. Gaies is a national speaker on divorce-related parenting matters. Welcome, Jeremy, to the podcast.
Stephanie, thanks so much for having me.
And before we started recording, we were talking about how we met, and I was a note taker for a collaborative case that you did. And that's
right.
Yeah. So, and your latest book, A Clear and Easy Guide to Collaborative Divorce, I recommend that to any clinician and also people are considering doing collaborative divorce. I think it's a great manual for how the collaborative process works and the different pieces that come together. So tell everybody a little bit about what collaborative divorce is.
Sure, I'm happy to do so. So when people decide that they need to end a marriage, they have a variety of options to choose from for how to do that. Some people simply sit down together and they amicably work out some agreements. We call that a kitchen table divorce. They may not even have attorneys involved. Some people will go to a mediator and without attorneys and resolve their differences through the mediator and write up an agreement. Some people will hire attorneys, and the attorneys will work with each other, but trying to keep it out of heated litigation to get to an agreement. And some folks decide to use a process called collaborative divorce, in which each spouse hires an attorney, and together they hire neutral professionals, typically a neutral financial professional and a neutral mental health professional, and they work all together as a team, literally sitting around a table to work out all the complicated factors related to the divorce so that they can get to a resolution that meets their financial needs, their needs as parents and co-parents, and to some extent to meet their emotional needs as well. And that's collaborative divorce.
How does collaborative divorce impact the parents' relationship with their children?
You know, Stephanie, this is one of the areas of collaborative divorce that matters the most to me because my primary work is as a co-parenting professional, trying to help families get through divorce with the least negative impact on the children. And one of the things that I really love about the collaborative process is that it's incredibly child-friendly, family-friendly. So what the collaborative process does is it actively engages the parents to help them not only work through their differences as a divorcing couple, but to focus on what their children's needs are and to carefully plan out how they as co-parents are going to meet their children's needs going forward. So that includes sitting down to develop a detailed written parenting plan, but even beyond that, learning how to work together as a team on their children's behalf.
And I'm assuming, too, that this will help kids in the future, when they get to be adults, that they may have a better relationship or possibly if they get divorced, that they go through it in a more friendly way, I guess is the best way to say it. Is there any evidence or anecdotal evidence that children have better relationships in the future when their parents go through a less contentious divorce?
Yeah, absolutely. We know hands down that conflict between co-parents is one of the risk factors for children going through divorce. So when parents find a way to put down the swords, to work together on behalf of the children, we know through research that the outcome for those children, not just during their childhood, but even through adolescence into adulthood, is better. The outcomes are simply better. So collaborative divorce, because it is focused on peaceful solutions, is one of the ways to achieve that goal.
And if there's someone listening that is trying to figure out if they may be a potential candidate for collaborative divorce, what should they be asking themselves?
That's a great question, Stephanie. So the first thing that they need to ask themselves is, am I willing to work civilly, cordially, with my spouse? Am I willing to act in good faith to try to find an agreement that will serve my needs, my children's needs, but also my spouse's needs? If a parent or if a spouse is really committed to trying to get to a good win-win-win situation, then collaborative divorce can be a great choice. So that would be one of the criteria. Another criterion is, do I need this type of divorce? So if you, let's say, didn't have children and you just want to sit down with a spouse who you've been married to for a few years, you probably don't have very complicated finances. There are no children to worry about. You really don't need a process like this. However, if you do have children, if you share a business, if you own multiple properties, if you have any complications in financing, in terms of children, particularly if you have multiple children, if any of the children have special needs, if there's a lot of conflict between the parents and you really need a process that's going to help you learn how to work together as a team, in any of those situations, a process that is as comprehensive and robust as collaborative divorce is one that's really worth considering.
And what would be the first step someone would take if they're interested in pursuing collaborative divorce?
Well, there are actually a few options for the first step. One option is to look for an attorney who specializes in collaborative divorce. Not all attorneys are trained in collaborative divorce, and frankly, some attorneys may be trained, but they really may not be committed to the process. So my recommendation would be look for an attorney who specializes in doing collaborative divorce and have an initial consultation with that attorney to learn more about the process and to decide if this is the right process for you. So that would be one entry point. Another entry point is, rather than going directly to a collaborative attorney, is to meet with a collaborative neutral. So that neutral could be a financial professional who's trained in collaborative divorce. It could be a mental health professional who's trained in collaborative divorce. So I sometimes receive calls from people who say, can I come in? I want to talk to you about how I might go about getting divorced. And when I meet with them, I will share with them that there are a variety of ways to do it. And one of those ways is collaborative divorce. And I'll help them think through whether this process may be a good match for their needs and their family's needs. So that's another entry point. A third entry point, and obviously the most affordable and the easiest one, is to do some reading about collaborative divorce. There is a tremendous amount of information out there now, even though many people aren't familiar with the collaborative process. If they're willing to look for information, it is out there. So you can certainly just go online and read about collaborative divorce. But I think, as we all know, when you go online, you're often going to get maybe a mixture of information and not the most complete information. So I think a better option is to read a book about collaborative divorce. While I have a book that describes the process, I'm certainly not the only author out there. And there are a number of good books that talk about the collaborative process and other divorce processes. So I would encourage you either go on Amazon or go to your local library and see if you can find a book or two about the collaborative divorce process. Learn about it, maybe ask people around you if they're familiar with it, particularly people you know who may have recently gone through a divorce. And then again, when you're ready, sit down and speak with a professional, either an attorney or another professional who's trained in collaborative divorce, and learn everything you can learn about the process so you can make the best decision.
And I want to read a little bit from your book, A Clear and Easy Guide to Collaborative Divorce. You write, what's wrong with traditional divorce? And I tend to not focus on the negative part of it, but I think it's really important for people to know that haven't been through the divorce process, what a traditional divorce looks like. So could you explain a little bit about what you write about what traditional divorce looks like versus collaborative for people that maybe aren't familiar with the traditional divorce process?
Yes, of course. So the first thing to understand is that when you go through a traditional divorce process, basically it's one spouse suing the other spouse in court. It's kind of that simple. And when one person sues another person and the other person countersues the first person, you're already set up in a very negative, toxic, adversarial atmosphere. So right from the start, the premise is really problematic. Here you have a problem between two people who have shared their lives, who probably may share children, and whose lives are intertwined, and to put them, or for them to put themselves in that kind of adversarial situation right from the start is really problematic. So the very premise is troubling. But once people do that, what happens, it's sort of like a snowball going down a hill. It's not very big at the beginning, but it starts to collect more and more mass as it goes. So you go to an attorney and you say, hey, listen, I want to get divorced. I want to, in essence, sue my spouse, or my spouse has filed papers and my spouse is suing me. What do I do now? And if that attorney pursues a traditional divorce, or if you ask the attorney to pursue a traditional divorce as opposed to, for example, a collaborative divorce, they're going to have to file certain forms to demand information, which may or may not be forthcoming. There will be court hearings. You'll stand outside of a judge's chambers waiting to be called in. You'll be called in. It's very difficult, tense, intimidating. The judge has very little time to get to know you or your family situation, but there will be a series of hearings like that, and potentially eventually a trial in front of the judge where all kinds of allegations are made and the truth gets twisted. So these are some of the problems with a traditional divorce. There are many other problems too. Everything goes in the public record, so it's not private at all. It's very inefficient, and as a result, it becomes very, very costly, and it increases the negativity in your life. So if you have children and you and your co-parent are going through a divorce, you can plan to be going through that nasty process for a year, maybe a year and a half, all the while having to be there for your children. That's a big, big ask. It's a big undertaking. And most folks find it's very hard to keep an even keel through all of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that privacy part is important, because I can tell you that I have a file cabinet after my mom passed away. I have a folder of all of my parents' divorce papers and all their negotiating. So with collaborative divorce, you can kind of keep that out of the potential of that being in your children's hands, right? All that information.
Oh, absolutely. What happens in a collaborative divorce really does literally happen behind closed doors. There's nothing in the court record until the very end. And what goes into the court record is simply the collaborative marital settlement agreement, which is the document that identifies what the two spouses have agreed to. And even when it comes to financial information, many courts, for example, the courts in the area in which you and I work, are very willing to keep that information limited in the court record. So they will even agree that financial information does not need to be fully filed. So there are a lot of protections for privacy in the collaborative process, much like there are in mediation, but it even goes beyond the protections in mediation, because mediation is still considered part of a litigation process. But collaborative divorce is not litigation. It is conducted fully outside of the court process, and it's only at the very end that the final agreements are filed with the court.
And one of the conditions of doing collaborative is that if you decide that things aren't going to work out in collaborative, you can't have those representatives go to court with you, right? Is that the...
That's right.
Okay.
In fact, there are three pillars of the collaborative process, three basic requirements. The first is that each spouse has to hire an attorney. So you can't do a collaborative divorce without attorneys. Number two, the spouses have to sign a written agreement. We call it a participation agreement that spells out the rules of a collaborative divorce process. And those rules include things like transparency, making sure everyone's being forthcoming with information. The rules include privacy and confidentiality. The rules include that only the spouses make decisions. None of the professionals will make the decisions. So there are some guidelines that come in that participation agreement. And then the third element that's required is there must be a disqualification clause for the attorneys in the participation agreement. What that means is the attorneys are all in working to help the spouses get to a resolution. But if for some reason at some point one of the spouses decides to bring the matter to court, both attorneys have to step out. And people sometimes say, wait a minute, why would we want that? Why would we want to lose our attorneys when we're already midway or even further in the process? And the reason is that when attorneys know that there's a chance that they may end up going to court with this same family, then they have to operate on two tracks. On the one hand, they have to be putting energies into reaching an agreement. On the other hand, they need to be preparing in their minds for what happens if this goes into litigation. So their attention is somewhat divided, and it kind of keeps the specter of court hanging over the room. If there's a disqualification clause that says if it goes to court, the attorneys are out, then everyone's attention, including both attorneys, is focused solely on getting to a resolution.
And before we record, we started talking about something called cooperative divorce. Now, what's that?
So cooperative divorce is a somewhat less defined term because different professionals have different definitions for what a cooperative divorce is. So historically, the term cooperative divorce really meant a litigated divorce in which the two attorneys were going to try not to be hostile or adversarial, but we're going to try to work cordially and cooperatively to help work out an agreement. So that's sort of the traditional understanding of it. However, now that collaborative divorce has become an important part of the landscape, there are professionals who have found that when you have two spouses who would be otherwise appropriate for a collaborative divorce process, but one or both of them simply is not willing to have a disqualification clause that would mean that their attorney would have to step out were it to slip into court, they sometimes say, let's do something that is like a collaborative process in every way, except we will not have that disqualification clause. Now, by definition, that means that it is not technically a collaborative divorce process, but it may be something that resembles a collaborative process, and that's what we nowadays refer to as a cooperative divorce. So it looks like a collaborative process, but there's no disqualification clause for the attorneys, which means the attorneys do still have to keep their mind open to the possibilities of what happens if you go to court. But we try very hard in those cases to keep a peacemaking tone, to maintain as much transparency as possible, to maintain as much privacy as possible, so that we get as many of the benefits of a collaborative process, even though we're relinquishing the part about disqualification.
So if someone's interested in a cooperative divorce, would it be the same process, the three different ways to first see an attorney that specializes in collaborative? Would it be the same thing, or would you go to...
It would be the same process. Okay. Now, in that case, I would still recommend, even if someone said, listen, I know I am not going to agree to have my attorney disqualified should it go to court. I know that I'm not a candidate for a collaborative divorce, but I would be open to something that looks like a collaborative divorce and that might fit the category of a cooperative divorce. I would still recommend that person go to a collaborative specialist, either to an attorney who specializes in collaborative divorce or to one of the neutrals who specializes in collaborative divorce, because that professional very likely would be open to something like a cooperative divorce that will follow the same format as a collaborative divorce. If you go to a collaborative attorney who says, I will only do collaborative divorce, well, that person then may not be someone who could work with you in a cooperative divorce. But most attorneys who do collaborative divorce, they are willing to use other out-of-court methods for getting to an agreement, and cooperative divorce would be one of those methods.
And do you still have a neutral mental health professional in that role, or is that a
So,
little bit different?
yeah, so the answer is it depends.
Okay.
Even in a collaborative process, the attorneys don't always bring in neutral professionals. It is the model that we tend to use, is we tend to bring in neutrals, but it is possible to do a collaborative divorce with just two collaborative attorneys. You can likewise do a cooperative divorce with just two cooperative attorneys, but in the cooperative cases in which I've been involved, we have used neutral professionals. And I strongly recommend it because despite all of the other positive aspects of collaborative divorce, I think one of the very best aspects of it is the use of trained professionals from different disciplines. So a trained accountant or other financial professional who will handle all the money issues, and a trained mental health professional who will serve as the facilitator. And I should use this opportunity to mention there is another form of collaborative divorce, another style of doing collaborative divorce in which two mental health professionals are used as divorce coaches. So each divorce coach would be aligned with one spouse or the other, and that's another very commonly used form of collaborative divorce. In our area, I'm in Tampa Bay, as are you. In our area, we lean very heavily to what we call the neutral coach model, where we have just one neutral mental health professional who facilitates the whole process, one neutral financial professional, and then, of course, the two collaborative attorneys.
And when you go to that first team meeting, the first meeting that the couple goes to, can you give kind of a brief overview of what that meeting looks like for people that aren't familiar with this process?
Sure, I'm happy to, because that meeting is really a wonderful expression of how the collaborative process is different from other processes. So leading up to that first full team meeting, the spouses have each met with their attorneys. The attorneys have gathered a team together, so there would have been an initial meeting or initial phone conference amongst the professionals to make sure everyone knows what their role is. In almost all cases, I, as the neutral mental health professional or the facilitator, would have met with each of the spouses to gather initial information. And then we plan a day that everyone will meet, typically at the office of one of the neutrals. In our area, those meetings often happen at the office of the neutral financial professional. They usually have large conference rooms that are very accommodating, and it's neutral territory because that neutral is not one attorney or the other. And everyone gathers at a set time. The professionals get there a little bit early to do what we call a pre-brief. So we exchange some information to be prepared for the meeting. And then we welcome both spouses into the room. They get a chance to meet their spouse's attorney, who will greet them in a very friendly and cordial manner. They will get to meet the neutral financial professional, who they may have already met. Sometimes they have a contact with that professional in advance, but sometimes not. And then, of course, they get to meet again with the neutral mental health professional, and I would have already done an intake meeting with them. And we literally sit around the table. So we have a conference table. We all sit around it. Typically, I like to have the spouses sit on the same side of the table so that they understand that the problem is not really between them. It's a problem facing both of them as to how they're going to handle their finances and their children, their marital home, all those types of things, how they as a couple, a divorcing couple, will handle it. But the point is that we're all sitting around the table, and we usually spend about 2.5 hours together. We have an agenda, so we follow a very clear agenda, and we help them start to gather the information and start to think through how they want to construct their divorce.
And we have snacks, too.
We do have snacks. In fact, I always say, I'm a big fan of chocolate chip cookies. So sometimes people bring a vegetable plate or they might bring some cheese and crackers, and that's all well and good. But in my mind, nothing beats chocolate chip cookies. So I always like to make sure that there's some good sweets on the table. It's a funny thing. We do it because we want people to feel comfortable. We want it to be as informal and relaxed as possible. And for some people, having something to eat is also very calming and very comforting. Breaking bread is something that traditionally has brought people together. I do have to confess that whenever there's food at a collaborative team meeting, I do find that I'm eating more than anyone else, but I think that's just because I have that sweet tooth I mentioned a little bit earlier. But it is part of what makes the process different. I mean, can you imagine going to a courtroom and somebody offering food to the people who are going through the process? And what we do here is we say, listen, we know this is hard. We know this is painful. We know that there's serious issues and there may be some serious mistrust between you, but we're going to sit down like adults and we're going to help you think through how you can handle this in a mature and responsible way that will maximize the resources within the family, protect your children's interests, and help you look toward your future. One of the big things about collaborative divorce is we're not focusing on what happened in the past. We're focusing on how you can use all of your resources so that you can be financially solid, financially independent in the future. You can afford to have the 2 homes in which the children will live. You can afford, for example, college. This is another wonderful example about the collaborative process. In many states, such as in Florida, there is no legal obligation for parents to pay for college for their children. In some states, it's different, but here in Florida, as an example, there's no obligation. So if you go through a court process, the issue of paying for children's college education won't even come up because there's no legal obligation. In a collaborative process, while there's still no legal obligation, it is very common for parents to sit together and plan out how the children's college is going to be paid for. It may be by funds that the family has that they set aside in a separate account. It may be the way they handle the children's educational accounts that have already been set up. It may be by an agreement that one spouse will cover the costs of college or that they'll split the college costs in a certain way. There are all kinds of ways to do it, but the point is that in a collaborative process, the couple can talk about anything that affects the family and they can reach an agreement right at that point in time at which they are completing their divorce. And I think that's another huge benefit of the collaborative process.
And I think another exciting part is that you can come up with all sorts of possibilities of solutions.
Oh, you absolutely can. The collaborative process is one of the most creative processes out there. It's creative for a variety of reasons. One reason it's so creative is because there are no constraints like there are in court. So if you go in front of a judge and a judge has to make a decision, a judge is bound by what the law says and by the standard ways those things are handled. A judge can't go too far out on a limb to suggest something that's particularly creative because it's not really the judge's job to do that, and that could result in one spouse appealing and saying, that's out of the box and that's not what should be done. In a collaborative process, all of the decisions are made by the spouses, and they're not bound by any of those rules. They can do whatever they feel is best for themselves and for their family. So that makes it creative. Remember, you also have 4 highly trained professionals from at least 3 different disciplines who are able to provide information, guidance, and creative ideas to the spouses. So when you have these 6 people sitting around the table, that's a lot of brain power and a lot of creativity. Lastly is because it is a peacemaking process, instead of people getting entrenched in positions, we focus on interests. We focus on what it is that the spouses are trying to accomplish. What is their long-term destination? And so by doing that, instead of getting stuck in the confinement of, I want this, no, I want this, we're able to really think more openly, more flexibly, more broadly, and more creatively to get to solutions that really are so much better for both of the spouses and for their children, and probably better for everyone in their lives, including grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and extended family and friends and the church or synagogue or mosque to which they belong, because in this kind of process, it's about making a big peace as opposed to fighting a small war.
And for people that are wondering what the cost of this is, could you talk a little bit more about how this, in some cases, might actually be more cost effective than a traditional divorce?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with one very honest statement, and that is that collaborative divorce is not cheap. And the reason I say that is because some folks are surprised at how expensive this process can be. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, I was sitting with a family in a team meeting in a collaborative process, and I asked the spouses if they could give us some feedback on the process so far. And one of the spouses said, the process has been really good, but I didn't realize how expensive it would be. And she acknowledged that it was probably worth it, but she just didn't really understand the costs. And the costs are not low because you've got typically 4, sometimes 5. If you're using a 2-coach model, you would have 5 professionals who are actively working to help you as spouses reach an agreement. So as soon as you bring that number of professionals in, there are costs involved with it. However, and this is the good news, even though there are costs and even though it can be an expensive process, it is a very efficient process compared to litigation, which means that you can get to an endpoint far more quickly and far less wastefully of resources. So the same family that goes through a collaborative divorce, and let's suppose that collaborative divorce might cost $25,000. Had that family gone through litigation, that litigation would probably have cost $50,000, $75,000, maybe $100,000. So it can be a very expensive process, but the value is very high, and the benefits are wide ranging.
Especially the emotional cost. That you have a much higher emotional cost with litigation than you do with collaborative.
Really do. I will tell you, I've not been through a divorce myself, but I have been a participant in litigation involving family matters. And it takes a toll on you that if you've never been through it, you can't possibly anticipate. You are constantly thinking about it. You're constantly waiting to get a call from your attorney or receive a document or have to search for information or have to prepare memos or whatever it might be. So it's grueling work. And remember, because it touches family matters, there's just a tremendous amount of emotion with every one of those tasks you have to do. So most folks who go through litigation on family matters, whether it's a divorce or it's estate matters or whatever it might be, most folks are going to say they don't sleep very well during those periods of time. They spend a lot of time gritting their teeth. They're not living life fully because they're consumed by the litigation. And in divorce, that is almost always the case. So I am just a huge advocate for anything that saves people from the miseries of litigation.
And in closing, could you, I know you talked already about what potential couples maybe qualify for a collaborative divorce, but what couples would qualify more for traditional divorce?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you're raising that point. I am not someone who says that collaborative divorce is right for everyone. I think it's a wonderful option for those families for whom it's a good fit. But there are families and there are spouses for whom a different process needs to be selected. So, for example, if there's a family in which one of the spouses is simply not able to function because of mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and if they cannot be treated within the process, then they would need to go to a different process. The collaborative process is very good at working with people who have those issues, but I'm talking about folks who are not able to respond to treatment and therefore can't make decisions for themselves. You can't be in a collaborative process if you can't make decisions for yourself, because it's all about spouses making their own decisions. Domestic violence is another area where we can handle certain types of domestic violence within the collaborative process. But if you have a coercive, controlling spouse, someone who is really dangerous to the other spouse, that cannot be handled effectively in a collaborative process, and litigation is really the only other option. When there is such a differential in the power between the two spouses, which happens in domestic violence families, but also happens in some other situations. So, for example, if one spouse feels, even with an attorney involved, they don't feel like they're going to be able to stand up and represent their interests, they might need to go through litigation, because litigation does have more safeguards in some ways to handle those factors. But here's what I would say sort of at the end of it is, it's worth considering all of the processes, regardless of what your circumstances are, and to talk with someone who really understands the difference between the different divorce processes, so that you can make the best decision for you once you're armed with the information that you deserve to have.
And is collaborative divorce available in all 50 states?
It is not only available in all 50 states, it is available throughout the world. I forget the actual number, but it is well over 100 countries that have active collaborative divorce communities. There is an umbrella organization called the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals that helps spread the word about collaborative divorce and support the collaborative communities all around the world. And if your listeners would like to look up some information, they can simply Google the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. If they are in the Tampa Bay area, they can certainly look for the Tampa Bay Academy of Collaborative Professionals or Next Generation Divorce. Those are two practice groups that provide information and guidance to folks who are looking to pursue a collaborative divorce. You also, as I said, you can do some reading, and if you go to your local library or go onto Amazon and just type in the keywords collaborative divorce, you'll find a number of resources that can be tremendously helpful.
And also, if you're a clinician or other professional that wants to be trained in collaborative divorce, Jeremy, you're part of Tampa Bay Collaborative Trainers, and that's at tampabaycollaborativetrainers.com.
That's right. We go around the country, and in fact, we go around the world. We just came back from doing some trainings in Israel, and we go to communities and we teach professionals how to do this collaborative divorce process. And we're just happy to spread the word about this peacemaking option that has helped, and I believe will continue to help so many families navigate a good path through the very challenging circumstances of divorce.
And you went on that trip to Israel with Adam Cordover, who was a previous guest on the podcast, talking about collaborative divorce from the attorney point of view. So that's another episode that people can check out about collaborative divorce. So, Jeremy, in closing, what advice would you have to someone that's considering going this route?
So the advice that I would say to them is stop, catch your breath, and go out and get information before you make any decisions. You know, when folks first get caught up in the process of divorce, either they make a decision to divorce or their spouse says it's time to get a divorce. You know, people are so used to thinking about traditional litigation and divorce, they think, well, I better go out and hire, a really tough or mean attorney to represent me. Stop, catch your breath, gather some information, and then you will make a decision as to what's right for you. And I think many families will find, whether it's collaborative divorce or cooperative divorce or mediation or kitchen table divorce, there are some really good alternatives to fighting things out in court. So I wish you a safe path through a difficult juncture in your life.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. I really appreciate you being on this podcast episode.
It's my great pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, Stephanie.
And that concludes another episode of Talking Brains. Thank you to Dr. Jeremy Gaies for his insightful information about collaborative divorce. And I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Sarkis at stephaniesarkis.com. Please hit that subscribe button and give us a rating. It's much appreciated, and have a wonderful day.